You may know that Frederick is hip and historic, a trendy and fun place to visit and live, a place where you can spend time and go home happy. Frederick is also a place with a heart, and several programs take care of people who are not so fortunate as most of us with a permanent address. Mayor Randy McClement and I are here with Mike Spurrier, Director of the Frederick Community Action Agency, and Brad Petersen, Supervisor of Housing Services for the Frederick Community Action Agency, to share and learn how the city and you can help the homeless. So, welcome, Mike. Welcome, Brad.
Yes. Thank you.
Thanks for coming here to talk to us about homelessness.
Thank you for inviting us, Patti.
So, what can you tell us about the homeless problem in Frederick? Do we have one?
Well, yes, we have one. In a lot of ways, it is not a huge, significant problem. Now, there certainly will be people who disagree with that. But I think we're talking about less than 1% of the Frederick County population. What's difficult with homelessness is that there may be people who are homeless for one night. There may be people who are homeless for a week, a month. There may be people who are chronically homeless. And HUD defines chronically homeless as being homeless continuously for 12 months or more, at least 12 months or more, or having 4 or more episodes of homelessness in the past 3 years. So when you look at that whole range, that whole gamut of anyone from being homeless for a few nights to someone who's chronically homeless for literally years, it really takes in a wide range of situations.
So you mentioned the HUD calculation or HUD description of it. We also hear that we talk about how the school uses sort of a different calculation or a different, not calculation, but I guess a qualification. Can you explain more how they do that?
So HUD has, of the federal departments, HUD has the most strict definition of homelessness. And they really and look at people who are literally homeless, meaning you're on the streets, you may be living in a car, you may be in an emergency shelter, you may be in transitional housing for people that are homeless, or you may be living in a place not meant for human habitation. That's their terms. An abandoned building, camping out in the woods, that sort of thing. Other federal departments, the Department of Education, ultimately sort of over the school systems, Department of Labor, Department of Health and Human Services, Department of Veterans Affairs, uses a much broader definition of homelessness that also includes people being doubled up. So people staying with friends or family, or finding someone and camping out on their floor for a night or sleeping on the couch for a week. People, including students who are couch surfing. So Frederick County Public Schools and really the Maryland State Department of Education uses that much broader definition, including people who are doubled or tripled or quadrupled up. And so the vast majority of the students that are counted as homeless in Frederick County Public Schools are students who are doubled up and staying with other family or staying with other friends or family members, or it might be the whole family that's homeless, or it might just be that student.
So we talked, you gave you a couple definitions of homelessness. How do you actually know how many homeless we have in the city?
Well, there's a few different ways that we go about counting the number of individuals that are homeless. One of the main ways is doing an annual point-in-time survey, which is a 24-hour snapshot of the individuals that are literally homeless, like Mike was just talking about. And we do that by having outreach teams go out to known homeless campsites. This is done the last Wednesday of January. And we also count the number of individuals that were in sheltered programs as well. So we do that 24-hour sort of blitz with all these different organizations. Community Action Agency takes the lead to coordinate that. And we find that there's, on average, about 300 people that are counted as homeless during that point in time snapshot. In 2017, the number was 309 individuals. So in 2016, it was 349. One of the variables with the point in time survey is that weather does play a significant factor. If you remember in 2016, that was actually a few days after a significant snowstorm. And so we had a lot of individuals that may have come into shelter programs and increased that number maybe a little artificially. In 2015, that number was 311 individuals. So from 2015 to 311, from 311 to 2017 at 309, there wasn't much change.
We mentioned earlier reference to HUD. We should let the audience know that's the Housing and Urban Development Department of Housing.
U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development.
So now you go out and you see that there's 300 or so people that are out there and not having a permanent place to live. What services can we offer them to try to change their life around?
Well, there are, before we jump to that, I was also going to mention that Brad is also our system administrator for the Homeless Management Information System, which is a database program that's essentially mandated by HUD, the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development, mandated that continuums of care or continua of care around the country, which are typically jurisdictions, government agencies and nonprofit agencies in one or more jurisdictions working together to address homelessness. So each of those continua of care that are receiving HUD funds need to have a database system which we administer. The Community Action Agency administers for all of Frederick County. I think we have about 8 or 9 different agencies participating in our Service Point HMIS database system, and Brad is our system administrator for that. So that's another way that we can use data to really quantify how many people are homeless on any given day. And of course, there may not be people who are entering shelters or other facilities to be counted. So to go back to your question, Mayor, looking at resources, there are 5 different shelter providers in Frederick County right now. And also there are different tiers of shelter. So that term continuum of care, so at one end of the continuum of care are homelessness prevention programs. So for example, the Religious Coalition for Emergency Human Needs helps to provide financial assistance for people who may be facing an eviction from their housing, so to try to prevent that eviction. You know, somebody was sick and out of work for 2 weeks and they didn't get paid and they can't afford the rent that month. So they're trying to keep people in housing. Also at that end of things are outreach programs, so doing street outreach, going to shelters, going to the woods, going to the streets where people who are homeless may be, and trying to engage folks in services. The next step is emergency shelter. And typically emergency shelter is time limited. It's often programs that operate dusk to dawn, so overnight shelter, but folks may be out of the shelter and back on the streets during the day. And it's usually a place where people cannot store their belongings during the day. So kind of those 3 distinctions. So the Religious Coalition also operates the Linton Shelter for adults, which has 80 beds. And they recently, maybe 2 years ago now, opened a family emergency shelter and have about 12 to 15 beds in their family emergency shelter. So shorter term emergency shelter. Hartley House also operates an emergency shelter for survivors of domestic violence, both adults and children. Then kind of the next step up is transitional shelter or transitional housing. Community Action Agency operates a transitional shelter for homeless families. The Frederick Rescue Mission, another provider, operates the Beacon House, which is transitional housing for men, and the Faith House, which is transitional housing for women and children. And then Advocates for Homeless Families is the fifth provider agency that I mentioned, and they operate long-term transitional housing for families. And then kind of the next step, and really the final step in the continuum of care, is permanent housing or permanent supportive housing, where there's actually services tied to the housing that organizations provide.
Well, great. So we have a sort of a broad-based start to hopefully end kind of scenarios. On average, how many people go through a process in a year? Do we know? I mean, you have 300 people out there, and it seems like 300 seems to be the continuing number, but it doesn't seem to be going higher. So I guess I could make the assumption that means that there are people who are getting into the system and actually being taken off of the rolls because of some of the services we offer.
In the Service Point database that we have, I looked to see that in 2015 there were 1,453 homeless individuals served by all of those participating agencies. In 2016 it was 1,301 individuals, and in 2017 year to date we've served 1,088 individuals that have been homeless.
Wow, good.
Year to date.
Year to date, yeah.
So if you had, if you could change one thing, what do you think you would do? What would you do to help reduce homelessness?
Well, great question that I wasn't planning on. So I would say, a big issue recently, and everyone's aware of this, but the whole opioid crisis, is really having an impact. There's certainly, and some people will deny this, but based on my 30-some years of working in human and homeless services, there's certainly a connection with substance abuse, or substance use as it's now called, but certainly a connection there with abusing alcohol and drugs, and kind of leading folks down to, really the bottom rung of the ladder and of their lives often. Without question, we are seeing more people using, abusing heroin, the synthetic opioids, Oxycontin, also the whole synthetic marijuana issue, K2 and spice and all that sort of thing, and really having devastating effects on people. And it might be people that have co-occurring disorders when they have serious mental health problems too. And so to add some really heavy-duty drugs and unpredictable drugs like the synthetic marijuana on top of all that is just really devastating for people's lives. And we had at least 3 of our clients die from overdoses of laced synthetic marijuana back in the springtime, I guess that was, yeah.
It was in a short span that it was sort of came through a batch, I guess, of that manufactured drug, basically, yeah. So I certainly echo Mike's thoughts about having those supportive services available. My take on it is having available permanent housing expanded. That having that is really the key to, in my opinion, resolving homelessness, while also having those other programs that Mike had talked about, emergency shelter, transitional housing available, but also expanding on the permanent side of the equation, our Housing First program, permanent supportive housing. There's a newer program that we're starting to, this is our second year getting into, called Rapid Rehousing. So it's a short-term subsidy for individuals that are homeless to get them back into permanent housing. So expanding those programs at the same time keeping the existing structure that's already in place, I think is very important.
You talked a little bit about some of the continuum of care, including services once they get in some housing. Does that include a requirement to seek care if they have a medical issue, mental health issue, or is that just hope for the best?
Well, typically, yes, it is a requirement to participate in case management and treatment, it might be addictions treatment, it might be mental health treatment, it might be health care treatment. So it's really trying to find a balance of that, Patti, I believe. And we know that if someone, takes advantage of the services that are available, they're going to have an easier time of it, and they're going to have a more successful life and better outcome in the long run.
Well, for people who are watching this, if they want to find out more about services or ways that they could help, what's a place that they can go to get that information?
Yeah, our website's on the City of Frederick's page. It's www.cityoffrederick.com/FCAA, and there's a lot of resources that we're talking about today, along with, there's actually some pictures of local campsites of homeless campsites that are there, so people can sort of see that, of what's happening in their community, and the conditions that some people are living in can be found there as well.
And I was going to say our phone number,
sure.
our
Yes,
main phone number is 301-600-1506.
And that's open for people to just call
Yes,
and have a
yes.
discussion.
And anybody's welcome to call me also at 301-600-3955.
Great. Well, thank you guys very much for coming out and giving us some updated information and letting us know what we as a City of Frederick do for those a little less fortunate and how we help them out. I appreciate it. Thanks for all your hard work.
Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you.
Thank you. And thank
You
you,
do
Patti.
good work.
Thanks.